Welcome to Progressive Mindset Podcast. My name is Natalie Potts, business coach and mentor, and each week I'll bring you an inspiring personal message to help you unlock creating a living life full of energy, action, impact and happiness. And today I am so excited and delighted to be welcoming on Jeff Way, an author, facilitator and coach who is sharing the recent release of his new book, Stuck, Now What? We discuss how you can reignite your career when it feels flat. So as always, over to Jeff to introduce himself.
Well, first of all, thank you very much indeed, Natalie, for inviting me along and also giving me the opportunity to send you a copy of my book, which was published at the end of February this year, called Stuck, Now What? In terms of myself, I am a coach, a facilitator, really somebody that helps people. And that's the space that I've been in and around for nearly 20 years now. And I got my first taste of it back in the corporate space in M&S Money, back in kind of 2002, 2003. And I had a sales job at the time. I didn't particularly enjoy it. And then I got approached at a photocopier and asked if I'd like to move into training. And the rest, as they say, is history. I've been working with people. I've been helping people ever since. And it is a passion of mine. And I take great joy from seeing other people achieve things in their lives that they perhaps didn't think was possible at one point. And, you know, in terms of the type of work that I do, I work with organizations predominantly, designing and delivering leadership management training, of which there's some coaching that sits alongside a lot of those programs, which is great to see, because I think it wasn't that long ago where there would be lots of those type of development programs, but organizations didn't buy into coaching alongside it. And it's such an important skill, because not only is it about helping people, but it's about listening and asking questions and challenging in a way that, you know, sometimes, you know, can get better results than the traditional leadership or management approach. So, yeah, it's a wonderful space that I feel privileged to operate in, and, you know, delighted to be able to come along and share some of that with you and also some of that with your listeners today. So thanks again for inviting me along.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. So I guess, yeah, you've kind of shared a bit about how you got into the coaching side and the facilitation, the leadership as well. So a great array of areas, and definitely I know add value for sure when you're talking about working in teams as well. And I think people underestimate leadership in terms of that they think that's got to be big businesses and things. And actually, I look at leadership like, well, if you have your own business or whatever, you've got to show up every day as a leader with those qualities, that perspective, that drive, ambition, everything.
You're absolutely right. I think there's almost a myth that says leadership is about hierarchy within organization, and it's about, you know, having somebody to lead. I have a similar view to you, and some of that view came to me through some of the work that Robin Sharma did and wrote about in his book, The Leader with No Title, I think. And he talked about everyday people who showed up every day and demonstrated those leadership qualities, like self-discipline, like focus, like determination, like a positive mindset or a positive attitude or a growth mindset, as we hear it nowadays. Each and every one of us has the ability to lead ourselves and therefore lead others. It's not always about leading others. It's about demonstrating those skills and those traits that we associate with what leadership is.
It's really interesting. I was listening to a podcast this week with, I think I pronounced his name correctly, Simon Sinek, who's obviously about like start with why. And it was wonderful. And he was sharing exactly that around businesses that will not invest in leadership programs and developing their people. And he kind of, you know, it was a bit of the attitude, they say, well, I can't afford it. And it's like, because they haven't got a budget for it, or that's the last thing they'd have a budget for. But actually, it's a little bit like I have an outlook of well-being, that it's something you can't afford not to do. And you should have that, because he then gave the example of 2 different workplaces. And it made me laugh, actually, that people working in one where the offices were horrible and old, but the team absolutely were engrossed and loved what they did and who they worked with, and the culture, the way they do things, versus somebody in a flashy, lovely office where actually it's very, process and structured, and actually people didn't get on the same, and the businesses didn't, that business didn't do as well, and that business flourished, and now they're in nicer offices. But he goes, it's not about that side of things. You've got to look at it differently. And I think, he was challenging that some leaders will throw back at him, well, you're wrong in the way you approach things, you don't know business, etc. And like you said in your book, actually, at one point, it's quite intimidating when you're up against people like that at moments, for sure. And like you mentioned, that hierarchy, you put them on a pedestal, etc., above you. But reality is, they're no different from us. They're no different from us in terms of what they're going through, they've been through, what they think and feel. And I say that to people sometimes when they talk about fear and things like that, because I said that they think exactly the same as you. We're all feeling the same things, or we've been through the same things. So it doesn't make anybody better than anybody else. That's just their ego.
It is, and Simon Sinek is a great guru and leader of thinking differently, and that's what we need. In across organisations at every level.
Yeah.
The landscape has changed now, and people don't just go to work. They go to work for a whole host of reasons. And this is why some people have struggled during the pandemic, is because they haven't been able to go to that natural environment where they can connect with other humans and feel part of a team, which is important to some people, feel connected to the work that they're doing or the output that it leads to. And I think it's all too easy to dismiss these ideas and suggestions and to look for holes in the people that are suggesting it. But for me, it all comes down to people and knowing your people. And when I go into organizations, the one thing that I encourage all of them to do is just to have more conversations with their people. And it's not a magic medicine. It's not something that is brand new and it's kind of life changing. It's just about having a conversation with your people, because if you understand what's going on in the world of your people, that's where you can help them. But I think historically we haven't allowed ourselves to have that time, or we haven't felt equipped to have those conversations. And I know when I speak to some leaders about coaching, they will say, well, I don't really want people showing emotion because I don't know how to deal with emotion. Okay, that's cool. We can do something with that. Or they'll say to me, well, what if people start going off on a tangent and talking about their personal life and some deeply traumatic stuff? I said, that's okay. We can work with that as well. As a leader, as a fellow human being, you're not expected to have all the answers. But if you are prepared to listen and understand, and rather than jump in and think that we have to provide solutions, just replay that information or make suggestions or look at guidance, then actually you don't have to do anything different other than what you've already done. But you're having a conversation. And for me, every conversation throws up something that you weren't expecting. And I think the wonderful thing about this period of time that we've been through, and I know lots of people have struggled in lots of ways, and in fact, all of us have struggled in some way, but we've been invited into people's homes. And I can see into your home and you can see into my home. And I've cleared it a little bit. There's normally lots more pictures. but it's a talking point. Whatever is behind you is a talking point. And you've got a choice. You can either ask about it and be curious as a fellow human being, or you could ignore it and be completely deadpan and keep it transactional. And I don't think we want those transactional conversations anymore. We want human to human conversations.
It's interesting, actually. It made me just think about, we'll come on to the book in a minute, actually, but where we, in especially corporates and businesses, that we put people in roles that either they're not ready for, they've just been quick or ticked the task box, and then we wonder why they struggle. And then we feel as as leaders as well, we feel then bad for having to manage performance, etc. But actually, the managing of performance is not a punitive, it's a corrective, and it's to sometimes empower people and for them to go through an experience to make them better. It's not just about like people look at, oh, I'm going to get the sack, or, oh, right, you're going to manage me out and things. But there has to be a reality of understanding where you're at, and that you might have got somewhere maybe a little bit too soon. It's like we spoke about before, just enjoying more the process, have a vision, but enjoy the process and be patient with it and learn and have a different, like you say, change your perspective on things, be open to things, get in discussions.
The process we're often very quick to want to get through, but actually the process is where the learning takes place. And without that learning, as you've rightly said, lots of us, and I've been in that space in my career, you arrive at the destination, you arrive in that position, and you're not as well equipped as you could be, and you struggle. And again, that's part of it. You're expected to struggle, but then it's who do we turn to, and actually how does the business respond to us? And I think some of the challenge in organizations is not so much around the language that we use, but actually the meaning that we place behind that language. Because when we get into the semantics of talking about performance management or HR or feedback, most of the time, people's perception and experience of those three things is a negative one. So if I'm a brand new manager and I'm struggling, and somebody invites me along for a performance management conversation, or somebody says to me, I've got some feedback for you, or somebody says, we're going to have a chat with HR, 9 times out of 10, the brain is thinking, oh my goodness, this is terrible. But actually, it's not 9 times out of 10 terrible. But it's a challenge, not so much around the language, but the meaning that we attach to them and how we can help people, because that process, going back to your point, is so important. And as much as we want to rush to that next point, actually, if we do take our time and we have enough support and we do get a bit of development along the way, then we'll arrive at whatever that destination is in a better place and still feel energized and good about the job that we do, rather than going home and doubting ourselves, and feeling that we're not very good, or we should have stayed where we were, or actually you can't do it, or whatever else goes through people's minds. So I think you make a really good point there.
Yeah, and I guess a challenge is though that we've never arrived, have we? We think it, but then it's the next part. So actually the reality is going back to the point of the process and that learning and having that perspective and that being forever there and evolving is that would work for me and resonate more as a way to look at things, because otherwise you can lead to disappointment as well, can't you?
And it often does, because we arrive at that fixed destination in our mind, and a lot of the time we arrive in a not good position because it's taken a lot of energy and it's taken a lot of time. We've had to draw on all our resources, so we don't arrive in the best state. And then we don't stop and enjoy it or reflect on it or take stock. It's about the next thing. And I think this is inherent within our society, and especially within organizations. It's always about the next thing. For me, I know it's a cliche, but I prefer to focus on the journey and the process, because that's where the learning is. That's where the enjoyment is, if you can get your head around it, and you become less fixated with the destination. And should you arrive at a point, that you had in your mind, then great. But it's not the be all and end all, because of everything you've experienced along the way.
So moving on to that then, I guess your journey. So here is your amazing book. So Stuck Now What? What was that moment where you was like, I'm going to write a book? Because I often think it myself, and then I plant some seeds and I'll, bring up my laptop and just write a few ideas, and then I'll just park that and move on. And I guess it's always there and as an idea, but it's really, I think it's very inspirational to see someone do this and add value. And there is, I guess what I loved about it is it's very practical, and I like that, and I'm very step by step on things, because that's how it works for me. So how did you come to write your book?
Wow. Well, there was lots of moments. I'd be lying if I said there was one moment where I woke up one morning and thought, right, I want to write a book. I'd been on a journey, my own journey of self-discovery back in 2008, 2009. I talk about this in the book. And it was a key moment in my life because there was lots of stuff, lots of baggage, lots of things that were holding me back. And at the end of one particular course that I was on, one program, we had a kind of a finishing party, but it was a back to the future party, and you had to come as yourself in 7 years' time, I think it was. And I've not been known for my creativity in the past. So, and I was up in Glasgow, so I wasn't close to home. So I thought I'm going to come as an author, and I went to a bookshop, and a secondhand bookshop, and I got a couple of secondhand books. I managed to get some paper from the hotel that I was staying in, and I created 2 front covers for 2 books. I was dressed exactly the same as I had been in the day, but I turned back up at this party with 2 books that I'd scribbled on as an author in 7 years' time. Now, I didn't know at that time I was going to write a book. I wanted to write a book.
Yeah.
And I didn't really revisit that until probably 2016, 2017, where I'd gone down a rabbit hole with work-life balance. And I thought, hang on a minute, this is maybe something that is not achievable and therefore not helpful for people to look at, the world through the lens of, you should be balancing your work and your life, and listening to some of the things people were saying, you work too much, you need to relax more. And what I was thinking, this isn't particularly helpful. So I went down that rabbit hole, and I ended up spending some time with a publisher at the time. I went through a process of writing a book proposal, went on a boot camp, took myself away to North Wales. I started writing, thought I'd written half the book, and then I put it to one side and didn't do anything with it. And then every now and again, like you just said there about yourself, I would write some more stuff down, and I think, I'm making progress. And then work had come along, or life, or all the other things. And it wasn't really happening. And I suppose the defining moment was I went on a pig wrestling course. And it's not, as you would perceive, wrestling actual pigs. It's a problem-solving course.
Right.
And it's a really good course, actually, run by a couple of psychologists who have worked with different sporting teams. And what it does is it allows you to clean up your problem. So my problem that I took was a book writing problem.
Yeah.
And actually, when I got into it, I realized it wasn't a book writing problem, because I'd written half the book. And actually, in my head, I'd written it many times over. It was a book finishing problem. And then after I was there 2 days, after a while, I thought, it's not a book finishing problem. It's a saying no problem to other requests. And then there was a whole host of things. I had about 20 problems that this could have been, but I worked through them. And actually, the first thing I did when I came back from that course, that was September 2019. First thing I did is I was cleared my diary. I went out to a lot of the clients that I was doing work for, and I said, look, I can't do any more work in the new year because I'm going to write. I didn't know how I was going to do this, by the way, but I just set my intention. And I was doing some work with some other fabulous training providers, and I said, look, I can't take any more work on in January because I'm going to write. And that's what happened. That was January 2020. So that was January last year. I still didn't know how I was going to do this. I just set my intention. And then, as the universe does, and I'm a big believer in the law of attraction. A guy came into my life called Ali from Gnome Publishing, who are my publishers. And I had a conversation with him. And then I had another conversation with him and his sister, Layla. And then on March the 16th in 2020, I traveled down to London. And I was due to go to Winchester afterwards to do some client work for the next couple of days. But I got the train down to London. I spent 4.5 hours in their office. And within that time, they created a structure for my book. And instead of going to Winchester, lockdown was announced. I got straight back on the train, came home, and set about writing. So there was lots of moments there where I kind of wanted to, had a go, put it down, wanted to, had a go, put it down, and then it all just happened last year.
That's so amazing, because it's like I've only recently discovered myself, and this is where we talk about this process of learning is absolutely key. And and I've loved reading for years. Used to hate it as a kid, loved it. And I think that's the point I'm making here, is that it's not just suddenly you're going to start reading and it just happens. I've just noticed this the last few months, that it isn't one moment. It's a bit, I guess, actually, I have therapy on and off, and I'm really open about that because it really helps me. And I'll notice when I'll get into like you say, a moment of, I'm doing tunnel vision, I can't see around, and I call it the fog. And so I'll know that therapy might actually a session with someone that is my therapist. It really helps me focus. But that's made me realise the fact that I do that over a period of the last 3 years now is that it isn't one moment. It's never going to be one moment. It is an array of lots of different experiences, and it's about me having a better and heightened awareness of those moments and the ones which really matter, to be the kind of almost the stepping stones to the aha moment. And I do think you get those aha moments and the light bulb moments, but it's not just on one factor, it's on lots of different things. And I think, again, people are searching all the time for that. Whereas actually, like you said, this is part of the journey, isn't it? Your book, and then what that goes to, and then the connections that you make. And that's a bit like networking. I love networking, but again, it's got to be both ways, and there has to be a real, it's not just jumping on every Facebook group for the sake of it, or it's more than that. It's like you say, getting into that conversation, that richness and authentic conversation where it works both ways. I think that's the real difference, and that's where you get that I love this word richness, but that's when you get the ideas, the creativity almost as well, for sure.
Absolutely. That book would not exist if I hadn't met all the people that I'd met in that time. And yes, some of them arrived as mentors and guides. Others arrived at different points, but with something that was able to help me. And I think that's also the realization. Not only do we tend to have this is the destination I'm aiming for, and an expectation that there's going to be that one moment, we often have the same expectation that actually it's just going to be ourselves that get ourselves there. We'll do the large proportion of the work, but that book would not exist if I hadn't been blessed with meeting all those wonderful people who had shared different nuggets with me along the way that kind of allowed me to navigate through whatever I needed to get through and then come out the other side.
Yeah. In your book, you mentioned around fear. And one of everybody always talks fear of failure. But I think one thing that's become very apparent and resonated with me was more this fear of security. And I again, if you look back at everything, like we've just said, how life's changed last year and so for everybody, that I think you have to think about what security means for you and how much that's going to help you almost. So I don't, the fear of security for me, it was just interesting to reflect on. What was the kind of background to that thought process for yourself?
Fear has held me back many, many times in my life, in my career, but also my personal life. And I looked around me and realized a lot of people around me had followed a similar path, in that they went through education, they went on to education in some cases. They then arrived in an organization and they started to work their way up. And, there's value in that, and lots of people do that. I'm not so sure how much people enjoy it, but that path didn't feel like the right one for me. It's the path that I followed early in my career because that's where the security was. That's where the safety was, or what I told myself. There's safety in being amongst the flock. Okay, whether we like that or not, it's true. And I always sensed and had this thought in my head, what if I broke the mold? What if I did something else? And then very quickly I'd be sucked back into, but you can't do that because of this, and this. And, I'm probably one of the first people in our family that's ever worked for themselves. And I still remember my mum saying, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to earn money? And it was like, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And she'd be like, well, what, people will pay you for that? Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, but will you get the same regular income? Will you get holidays? And it's just this, the blueprint or the framework that I'd been given. And I know why I was given it, and we're all given a framework in some ways, was the safe and secure one. And, you know, for me, it took an enormous amount of courage or valor, as I call it in the book, but also support from people around me to make that leap of faith. And the first time I did it, I fell flat on my backside, and it didn't work out, and I failed miserably, and my life changed. And I went from having lots of security to having very, very little. And I know how we attach ourselves to security, and to give that up is a huge wrench in many cases. And it's not for everybody. You know, I wouldn't say that. But there's a lot of people out there I know that aren't happy doing what they're doing, and, you know, wonder about these things that they could do, or worry about being stuck where they are. And, you know, you don't have to. You know, if you take stock and look at your circumstances and the people around you, you can see why you are where you are, but you can also see how you're able to start to break out from that. And for me, you know, I wouldn't have done things any other way, because even though my first business failed, and it did, there was so much learning that came from that, which I'd always been open to failure. And I talk about the fear of failure as well, as you've said, because I find it quite empowering. I'm not afraid of failure. And I think those people that are afraid of failure don't actually do some things because they might fail. And for me, that's just a waste. I'd rather have a go and see what happens. And if I fail, then I fail. And I know some people will deliberately say to me, Jeff, I don't like that word. I'd rather use something. Well, use something else. I'm comfortable with failure, and I've failed, you know, hundreds of times, and will continue to fail hundreds of times. But at the same time, I'm comfortable with who I am and what I do. And I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay.
Yeah. It's really nice to see that you suspend judgment, and it's hard for people to do. It is very hard. We do judge and we have ego, but you do have to have the awareness to let that go as well, and to know what you're, you know, just maybe stick in your own lane a bit of what's right for you, opposed to sometimes worrying about what everybody else is doing. And I think, like we touched on, social media plays that role for us so much in terms of that pressure of what we think we have to do, and actually just go on a bit of a journey. And like you say, failure for me, it doesn't hold me back. The security one resonated because I guess you have the fact that you've created something and you want to keep that going, and you fear losing. So I think you fear losing things, don't you? Opposed to maybe then actually, well, what could I have? And being a bit more visionary with it.
You're right. Seth Godin talks a lot about this in the book called The Dip, where he talks about our attachment to what we've already got. And, you know, you can hear this in organizations all the time. Every single day, you'll hear people say, well, I don't want to start again.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what do you mean? You don't start again. You know, if you've had 20 years in one organization, you're not starting again. What you're doing is you're taking 20 years experience into that next challenge or that next opportunity. But the mindset of, I don't want to start again. I don't want to be a beginner. I don't want to be at the bottom. I don't want to have to work my way up. That's because of our emotional attachment to everything that's gone before. Now, in some situations, people can absolutely hate their job, and they'll moan about the Monday. In fact, they'll start at the weekend. They'll tell you in the midweek that it's nearly, you know, weekend eve, and they'll tell you about their next holiday in 342 days. But they won't give it up because of how much time they have invested in their life so far working for that organization, which is crazy, really.
That's why it's always so interesting to connect and talk to people that have, like yourself, you touched on the law of attraction there, and I love the law of attraction too, from I guess not I always say the woo-woo perspective of if I think that is going to happen, but it does change your perspective on. It's certainly what got me into coaching and everything, was looking at law of attraction, and as well as I met a coach. But I think it is really interesting to think about what that means to you, and change your perspective on things. And when you have somebody that you talk to that's gone through cancer, for an example, and I do this quite a lot, is talk to people about, and I'll ask them, how do you see life differently? And since that, what's that experience showed you? And it's a bit like when we use the example of, that, like you said, actually, that the kind of the party where you dress up in
Back to the Future.
Yeah, when we ask those types of questions, like what would you tell your younger self, or if your new rocking chair scenario, and you're looking back on your life, suddenly it's like the world changes, and I would have done this and I would have done that, and it's like, so why don't you take a bit more stock and realize the reality of where you're at and what you need to do and change, apart from just thinking, well, it's like you say, it's an attachment, I've got this and I've got that, or it's a countdown to my holidays. Yeah, I don't enjoy it, but I get lovely holidays. Yeah, but it's your whole life, isn't it? And then actually your holiday is probably quite, your moment of de-stress for 5 days into the holiday. Then actually I have 3 days off where I really enjoy the holiday, and then guess what? Groundhog, back to the same routine again. It's a cycle.
Those are the conversations that I enjoy most, because the moment somebody gives you a little chink of light there, that there's something to explore, then I will pick up on that and explore. The holiday one's a fascinating one, because some people, believe it or not, if they go on a 2-week holiday, they'll need a week to relax.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
They'll say, I don't really relax until the second week.
Yeah.
Okay. But some people that go on holiday, the moment they come back, will say, oh, I feel like I need another holiday. And it's like, it's this never-ending process and cycle around holidays.
Yeah.
I have to kind of give credit to, the likes of Kirsty Mack, who came into my life back in 2008, in terms of getting me to think from the rocking chair perspective. Because at that point I was open, I was ready to receive a different train of thought. And I know I write about it in the book, in terms, I think it's Bronnie Ware, it talks about the 5 regrets of those people that were dying, and there's a book been written about it. There's a lot of research, and a lot of it is around, I wish I'd worked less, or I'd wish I'd had more time for relationships. I'd wish I'd done things that felt more value to me, or had more meaning to them. And I think when you lose people that are important in your life, and I'm no different to anybody else, in that I've lost people, it does make you take stock. And I suspect we take stock every time we lose somebody important in our lives, but then we may or may not do anything about it. And I feel quite fortunate that I have been bold enough to make some different decisions at those times, because in many ways it would have been easy for me to have stayed at M&S Money and carried on doing what I was doing with very little pressure or very little stress, but very much doing some of the things that we've already talked about in terms of holidays and not really feeling fulfilled and those types of things.
Talk a little bit around the 6 Vs and how that's come about.
I never had 6 Vs until I walked into my publisher's office on March the 16th. That's the truth. I've been doing a lot of work with organizations, teams, individuals around vision of success and values.
Yeah.
In fact, that forms a lot of the programs that I do, because I want people to think about their destination differently, and I want them to understand their personal values, because for me, personal values are a game changer. And actually, if you're having conversations with your people and you know about their values, you also know how you can switch them on and switch them off, and keep them engaged and motivated and those types of things. So I had those in my head. And then the other 4 really just were born out of conversation and stories that I shared of, well, I helped this person with that, and actually this seems to be a bit of a theme. And before we knew it, we had this framework. I always wanted a framework. I come from a learning and development background, so I read a lot. And I love reading, and I've read some fantastic books, and I fold the pages over. I'm one of those. And sometimes I write on them as well, which is terrible, I know. But I don't always do stuff with it unless there's something that I can attach it to. And so I wanted something that people could go back to. I wanted something that people could work through. And it's written in an order, but it doesn't have to be done in an order. So you start with your vision of success in terms of where you want to be. But it's a little bit different to a goal or an objective in that it gets you to think about the journey along the way and some of the challenges that you'll come up against. We look at your values then in terms of what gets you out of bed. And then we come right back to, well, where are you now? What's your current view? So in relation, if we're going to use the GROW model, the goal and the reality is the view. What's happening right now? Because strangely enough, some people don't put a great deal of emphasis on it, but what's happening now determines whether or not you can move to here. And we need to understand in the what's happening now, and also the vehicle, which follows the view, is we need to understand some of the things that you're doing each day, because if you're already busy and you don't have any time to make change, it takes real effort. But if you can see, and this is where within the vehicle, we're creating a very different type of plan, a very personal type of plan. If you can see when your time and energy is going, and then link it to your vision of success, then you can start to change some of the things. For me, it was about saying no, as I've said. I would say yes to lots of other work, but that would just keep me here. It wouldn't let me get to where I wanted to get to. So I started saying no. But then I'd started to, not do some of the things like exercise or meditation or stretching. And it was like, they're a must. They are in my day, because if I don't do them, I don't feel great and I don't have any energy in the evening. And then what comes after the vehicle is valor. It's all about courage and stepping outside. Because we have to, we can carry on where we are, and that's okay. And that's why we call it the comfort zone. But if we want to move forward, we've got to understand what those little steps are before we can take some big ones. So I break it down for people and I get them to think about, well, what's scary but you could do now? And I've done this myself because somebody flipped it onto me the other week, actually, which was great. And they said, well, actually, what could you do now that's scary? And I said, I'll sign up for the Professional Speakers Association. And then what could you do that's a bit scarier, that would take a little bit of thought? And then what's the big and bold thing that you can do? And the reality is all of these things are scary. But if we start to kind of almost break them down a little bit, they become less scary. And in your coaching capacity, and also when you're managing and leading people, the moment people start to take one or two steps, they've got momentum.
100%.
And they're already kind of looking that way rather than looking back.
I love that. Yeah.
And then the final one is what I call voice. And this is twofold in that it's about your inner voice and some of the things that your inner voice says to yourself. And I've got an inner voice as well. Steve Peters calls it the chimp. Jim Lawless calls it the tiger. There's a whole host of variations on it. But we have the inner voice, and it's important to understand what it's telling us, because in part we're designed to protect ourselves. So it's protecting us from perceived danger. So it's important to understand that, but also reframe some of those things. So a little bit kind of affirmational in terms of getting you to reframe some of the things your inner voice says. But then the biggest thing for me that's made the biggest difference is how to create a personal board. And on your personal board are people that can support you and guide you and challenge you and nudge you and love you for the person you are. But they're very much there in the background when you need them to help you take the steps towards achieving your vision of success. And I talk about Carl Jung's archetypes in this part of the book, because for me, it's absolutely fascinating. And when you start to see the people in your life in terms of the different archetypes, you can see what you might be missing. You can see what you're already getting in terms of support, but it might be that you're missing certain characters that can just question you or challenge you in a slightly different way. You're, in some cases, just put an arm around you and say, look, you're doing great. Okay. Remember where you were. This is where you are now. You're doing great. So that's how the 6 Ps came about. And, I'm glad that you said it's practical. And that was how I designed it. That's what I'd hoped for, actually, when I put that together.
Yeah, no, it is not. I guess I see that because I've come from a coaching perspective myself, and loads of in that I've got going through my mind. I think very much around, even like we were playing earlier, that example of Simon Sinek, where it's saying the two differences in terms of the happy people versus, and their environment's rubbish. But you do, the people around you play a massive part in environment. It isn't just aesthetics of what you see in your surroundings, it's more than that. And that's probably been one of the biggest steps I had to take many years ago when I first got into coaching in 2015, was work out who was in my world and those social connections. And that's been a big thing that's come from last year. I did a course on neuroscience in March, and it was all around looking at what creates like 6 habits of a healthy mind, and one of those was social connections. And so it's very close to me to think about, again, like the values is who's in my world. And like I said, the networking part, how does that work both ways? And if people aren't of my mindset, perspective, or the way I want to be in life, and to, I guess, be in the moment, then they're probably not right for me. And that's how I then connect with the right people. It's not about disconnecting with them, or no, they're not right for me, there's no, I don't get anything from them, but it is around that awareness that what is it I want to be, and who do I want in my world that's really going to help me, but I can help them as well. And it's such a big part, is this connections.
It is. And again, Kirsty Mack brought to my attention that, you meet people for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I do firmly believe that. And it might be that somebody comes into your life for a reason, and they prompt you to do something, or they provoke a new thought, and then off they go, and you never see them again. And that happens.
Yeah.
It might be that, people, and I've experienced this, are in your life for a season, and they're there, and they're on that part of the journey. They're with you, they're supporting you, they're encouraging you. You might be collaborating with them, you might be supporting them. But then something happens in their life or your life, and you go in different directions. That's cool, that happens.
Yeah.
But then there'll be probably a small group of people that are there throughout your entire life, because they love you for who you are. They don't kind of judge you as such, but they're there if you need them, and that's okay. All of those people are okay. I think sometimes, because we're wired for connection, we get attached to certain human beings, and if they have a different intention or a different energy about them, that can actually bring us down and stop us in our track. So I think it's important to be aware of the people that are within your circle, or the people that are on your personal board, and the energy that they bring. The networking one is a classic, because if somebody is not bringing energy but looking to suck the energy out of you, then that's very one way. And it's not about getting something out of the other person. It's just about being mindful of the fact that that person's not giving anything back. And if they're not giving any energy back, then that is a one-way street, and that's not a great place to be.
So I always kind of wrap things up and end with my quick fire questions, just because it's really interesting to see the different views and answers from people. So the one I always start off with is, what does success mean to you?
I love this question, and I've listened to it many times on your pod. Success for me is about doing what I want to do in the way that I do it. And it's not about a tick in the box or a certificate or a gold star or anything like that. It's purely about doing what I want to do in the way that I do it. And I enjoy a lot of that. Not all the time, but that's what I get to enjoy most of the time.
Yeah. And what would you tell your younger self, Jeff?
This is a good question as well, because it gets you thinking about your younger self. If it's all right with you, I'm going to flip it the other way. And I'm going to answer it from the point of view that, what would my younger self tell me now? Because I think, and the reason I say that is I think we lose some of that kind of youthfulness and that naivety and that energy and creativity. So my younger self would say to me today, keep being bold, keep speaking up and keep having fun.
Yeah, absolutely love that. What is one thing people can do to live a happier life?
Understand their personal values, because the likelihood is the conversations that they're having with their loved ones after work, outside of work, will always come down to values. And if they can understand their personal values, then they can decide what they want to do in terms of changing some things in their life.
Yeah, I think people really underestimate values. I think they think it's something, oh, that's not for me, or yeah, I think it's key, and it underpins probably every decision I make. In everything that I do is my values. And like we talk about time and energy, for sure. Goes back to, I'll think about, oh, what do I value here? And I had to really challenge that a few years ago. I was obsessed with getting to fitness shoots and all of that, and I completely sacrificed any family things. And I won't do that now at all.
I think you're right. Values shape all our decisions, but most of us aren't consciously aware of that. If you are prepared to do that, and there's an exercise I use in the book, and I use it with all the leadership groups that I train. If you're prepared to do that exercise, it's there in front of you then, and there's no excuses. And it makes it very difficult then to go against your values. And you can see when people's values are being challenged. For me, it is a game changer.
What can people do then to live a more purposeful life and have more meaning?
I think if people want to live a more purposeful life with more meaning, then at some point they're going to have to step away from the crowd. They're going to have to step away from the masses, because each of us has something within us that is driving us, that's bigger than us. And I think in order to fulfill that, or to work towards that, we have to step away from, in lots of cases, from the stuff that we're doing right now. And if we do, yes, it will be rewarding. It will provide richness into your life. It will be scary. It might be lonely at times, but it will be hugely fulfilling. And so for me, it is about stepping away from the crowd and the masses, and that won't be for everybody. So people listening, don't feel compelled to have to do that, or almost feel, well, I couldn't do that, or that's cool. But I think if people do want to live a more fulfilling, meaningful, purposeful life, then we have to step away from the crowd.
So it's just so fun. I'm laughing because I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was all about, it's Tim Grover and Lewis Howes, and I love Tim Grover. He's coached people like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, phenomenal. And he kept saying, do something, it has to be bigger than yourself. And then you've just said it. And this is what I love, is that you have to notice what you notice, and that these things come through. And then what do they mean to you? I'm not going to get hooked on that, but it's actually, well, why does that keep coming into my world? What does it mean to me, bigger than myself? It's really interesting.
It sounds like it's a sign, and it sounds like it's very much something to sit with and to explore, and to give yourself the time, Natalie, to sit with it.
I note loads of stuff down all the time. I always say to people, I'm not distracted. I've suddenly got a thought and I have to get it down. So finally, what do you want to be known for?
Wow, that needs a little bit of thought. What do I want to be known for? Two things really, and it comes back to two of my top 5 values. I would love to be known as, or known for, somebody that made a difference, and somebody that challenged the norm. And I set out each day with the intention of doing those things. I'm not always successful. I don't always achieve that. But if, when my time is up, people reflect and say, he challenged things and he made a difference, then that will be something that I've consciously set out to do. So I'd be happy with that.
And I'm going to leave this with this, that I love your book. So thank you so much for sending it. I really appreciate that and value it, and your time for today. it was interesting when I was flicking through again, and that quote landed with me of the world is changed by your example, not by your opinion. And what's interesting is that I think when we first connected a long time ago, I think it might be on Instagram or LinkedIn, and I saw that on something you did, and I wrote it down because I know you write do all the lovely cards, don't you? And I wrote it down on a card as well, and I kept it with me. And then I put it in my greatness planner that I have that I use every day. And then it just came about again. So again, it's that noticing, isn't it? The signs, but it is absolutely key, that quote. I love it, that the world is changed by your example, not your opinion. Love it.
Natalie, thank you so much for inviting me along to have a chat with you. You're doing some fantastic stuff. So
yeah, it's
keep,
really inspirational.
Keep doing what you're doing.
It's got me thinking. So where can people find and connect with you?
The easiest place to find and connect with me is through social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter.
Yeah.
If you want to check out more about the book, then have a look at the website stucknowwhat.com, and you can download chapter 1 for free. And there's also a workbook that goes alongside the book, which you can download for free. So even if you haven't bought the book, you can see the exercises there, which refer to the 6V framework. So stucknowwhat.com.
Amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And of course, a huge thank you to you for listening today. If you are looking to transform and build your coaching business, then I would love to share how my new programs in Infinite Greatness can help you leverage your business to make more money, make an impact, and have more freedom. Let's see if or how I can help you right now. As always, go take action, make an impact, and have a great day.